passage is not just giving us a series of to-dos and to-don'ts. He's not saying do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. He's actually describing what love is like and what love is not like. And envy is the opposite of love in a way that even most of the other deadly sins are not. Like greed, for example. It's very similar to envy. And when Ethan and I were talking about this series, he was like, it'd be helpful if you did one or the other. And I think I'm gonna do greed. It'd be helpful if you do envy because they're so similar, right? They're very similar, greed and envy. But here's the deal. When we're greedy, I may want to have more, or I may want to have more than you. But when I'm envious, not only do I want more, I want you to have less. I want you to lose what you have. I want you to be diminished. Samuel Roberts was a 19th century British poet, and he got together with this gathering of other people who were all praising this new duke, this up-and-coming duke. Like, I get together with guys that talk about dukes all the time. But dukes, they got together to talk about this up-and-coming duke. He was a good-looking guy, talented, wealthy. He was kind of this up-and-coming guy, and there was nothing but great things to say about him. And he describes this interchange with his colleagues, and Robert says, right in the middle of it, he says, thank God he has bad teeth. That's envy. If you have everything else in your life, I hope you have bad teeth, right? That's how we are sometimes. The wrong kind of competitiveness can creep in so fast in our lives. And that includes churches all the time. It is easy for churches to look at other churches and do the comparison game. Most churches would say, we would love to be the most loving church in the region. But when you say something like that, you compare yourselves with other churches. And if you see another church that might be demonstrating acts of love in a greater way than you are, then it causes you to feel envious. Causes you to feel like, well, there's got to be something wrong with them, right? They've got to be watering something down. There's got to be something happening over there. And we do that as Christians. We've got to tear others down in the process. It happens all the time. Happens all the time. With the advent of social media, I think we've taken this whole concept to another level. A researcher named Alexandra Samuel, she's kind of done a lot of study on this, documented the impact of social media on envy. And here's what she writes. Because we now have more access to more success by more people like us, than ever before in history, and they all seem to be recording their triumphs, it seems like everybody has better jobs, better ideas for decorating, better vacations, better kids, better dining experiences. And the more time people spend on social media, the more envy they experience. Envy's such a miserable thing, yet we do it to ourselves. And I 100% agree with that. I think modern-day technology has enhanced this. But don't misunderstand, envy is a very old sin. It's a very old sin, and it's so subtle, so central, that the very first time sin is ever mentioned in the Bible, the very first time the word sin is used, is in a story about envy in the book of Genesis. It goes really deep. It's the opposite of love. You've got Cain and Abel. They were the first brothers, right? God invented family, invented brotherhood for love, but Cain did not love his little brother Abel. He didn't. We're told in a very short passage in Genesis that they both brought offerings to God, to give their offerings to God. Abel apparently brings the best that he has, only the choicest portions, the firstborn of his flocks, the first of his herds, gives him all the best, gives God all the best that he has. Gives all of that to him. And Abel just kind of phones it in. Abel's just kind of going through the motions. And so Abel becomes aware that his spiritual intimacy with God, favor with God, that it's different than Cain's. And that was painful for Cain. But the pain did not prompt Cain to look at his own heart. It didn't cause him to look at his own motives when he kind of did the comparison thing. He decided that the problem wasn't him. The problem was, well, it's my brother. Every time he looked at Abel, there was an issue in his heart. And so he thought, well, if I just get rid of Abel, then everything will be better. What if there was no Abel? And God really tried to help him, but he wanted nothing to do with it. Look at this fascinating passage, this interaction between God and Cain. Genesis chapter 4. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you so angry? Why is your face downcast? If you just do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." Has anybody ever read the book East of Eden? It's kind of like the modern version of this Cain and Abel story, kind of a contemporary retelling of the story. And there's a passage where these ancient Chinese scholars kind of discover this passage about Cain and Abel, and they pore over it and finally come to the conclusion that there is in this passage a great offer given to the human race, a great offer given to all of us. Sin is crouching at our door, just like a beast ready to pounce. It's like this living thing that just wants to devour you. But it says, "Thou mayest rule over it." Thou mayest rule over it. It may not. You may not. It's not inevitable that you'll rule over it, but it's possible. And God gives us freedom to make choices. And so he poses these questions to Cain. He says to Cain, "Why are you angry? Why are you downcast?" The answer, of course, is because he was envious of his brother. But it's really interesting because after God asks those questions, Cain doesn't say anything. If Cain had just answered God, if he had just confessed his envy, if he just confessed it to himself, to his brother, to God, he could have been saved. He could have been spared. But the silence of Cain is what did him in. Envy destroyed his soul. And not only that, it destroyed his brother. Literally, as he murdered him. God said a really poignant and painful passage after the murder. This is what God says. "The blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground." The blood of your brother cries out to me from the ground. I want you to think about that for a minute. Think about the heart of God. God created the ground. God loved it. God created Abel in his image, and he loved Abel. The ground was not made to receive the blood of one of God's children. But here's the deal. The ground of this earth has been receiving the blood of God's children ever since. Lots of bloodshed over the years because of this sin envy. And I want you to try to imagine what it's like to be God. The pain he must experience as he watches this sin ravage the people that he created. From Cain and Abel, there's this kind of like green thread of envy that goes all throughout the Bible, runs all the way through the Bible. If you know the Bible at all, you'll know some of these stories. You've got Sarah, like the very first, just the very beginning, the very first mother of the people of God. Sarah envies Hagar, her child. You've got Isaac, the promised son of Abraham, and his brother Ishmael, and the historic implications of the envy in that relationship that still exists today. Then you've got Jacob, and you've got Esau, the next generation, and Leah, and Rachel, and all the envy there. Then you've got Joseph and all of his brothers who were really envious of his stupid coat, right? And then you've got Miriam and Aaron who are completely jealous of Moses because of the position that he has and his ability to speak, right? And then you've got Ahab who covets Naboth's vineyard. And Paul in the New Testament says that there are even people who preach the gospel, for crying out loud, out of envy and rivalry. And it happens all the time when pastors get up in front of people and they say things about other pastors. Happens all the time. One day there's a man named Jesus who started a community where his plan was to do the exact opposite of envy. And of course, the people that were following him, they just did not grasp it. Two of them, John and James, they come up to Jesus one day. It's recorded in Mark chapter 10, and this is the interaction. They say, let one of us sit at your right hand and the other on your left in glory. When you get to heaven, we want to be your main two dudes. We want to sit right next to you on the throne. And in the Gospel of Matthew, it goes even a step further because it says they got their mommy to go ask, right? And the other 10 disciples, they're all furious, not because of what these two guys have done, but because they didn't think of it first. And they were worried, what if they get to sit there? I won't get to sit there. And they were back and forth. And Jesus finally shuts them all up. And he says this in Matthew chapter 10, or 20, he says this. He says, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles, you see them all the time, these people with a lot of power, they lord it over the Gentiles. And their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Disciples, we're different. We're different. Instead, whoever wants to become great, and this is really strange, whoever wants to be great among you must be a servant. And whoever wants to be first must be your slave and must be last. Nobody taught this. The Corinthians didn't teach this. The Romans didn't teach this. The United States does not teach this. Jesus said, just as the Son of Man, just as I did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give my life as a ransom for many. In other words, guys, here's the plan. Every impulse you have, every desire you have, everything that you think might be right in your own eyes, do the opposite. Just do the opposite. Your every instinct, it's wrong. Look around. It's not working. The blood of every brother and sister cries out from the ground, so let's just do something different. Let's do the opposite. Let's make our lives about trying to serve others, enhance others, equip others, give of the lives of other people so that they can be built up. You can't stop envying other people by just trying hard not to envy them. Spiritual maturity is not envy management. It's not gritting your teeth, repressing and stifling your feelings so that you're miserable inside. That's not what it is. The only way to remove envy is to replace it with love. It's the only way. It's the only way. Where love is present, there's no room for envy to take root. It kind of pushes it out. It pushes it out. Let me give you a little picture of this. My son Tanner attends the same Bible college that my wife and I went to. Okay? He's going to be a senior this next year. And a couple years ago, my son was a preaching major with an emphasis in church planting, so he's kind of following in my footsteps, which I'm thrilled about. That's exciting, although it's going to be a hard life, okay? And he's kind of going that track. And my son won a preaching scholarship. And they only give this preaching scholarship to 2 people. That's all. That's it, in the whole school. And so it's a big deal, all right? Because not everybody gets this. I never won this award when I was in college. And I was at the college for a conference right after all of this, and I had one of my former preaching professors say to me, you know, your son is one of the better students I've ever had, one of the best preachers I've ever had in class. He never said that about me. But do you know what I said to that professor? I just said, thank you. That's awesome to hear. Why did I say that? Because I absolutely love my son more than anything in the world. And because of that love, I can't experience envy with my son. It's not possible. He's family. If he wins, I win. If he does well, I get really proud. If everybody were in my family, I would be enhanced by the well-being of everybody around me when they were successful. And I would not diminish them out of envious feelings. And that's kind of the plan that Jesus has. One family. It's not that we try really hard not to envy. It's that envy is just uprooted by love. Think of it like this. All of us experience this to an extent. There are people in your life that might be part of what you would call your inner circle, right? You got your family, close friends, people that you really care about, right? Your inner circle people. And you absolutely love them. And when things go well for them, you celebrate with them. You're so excited with them. And when they do poorly or something happens tragically in their lives, you feel that pain, right? That's the inner circle. Then you've got this circle of people that you're envious of, right? The circle of envy. We'll just call it that, all right? And these are the people that you're competing with constantly at work, in school, friends, people that are kind of surfacey friends, right? Those people that you're just always just envious of, and you just want them to fail so that you feel better. And basically, Jesus' plan is to take all the people in that outer circle and move them to the inner circle so that they're part of the family. That's Jesus' plan. Because there's neither Jew nor Gentile. There's neither slave nor free. There's neither male or female. We are all one in Christ Jesus. It's that simple. And it's that hard. So this week, I know love is patient and love is kind. But love doesn't envy. So don't look at the other people in your life as rivals, someone you need to outdo, outperform, squash. Just practice, with God's help, looking at the people in your life as Jesus does, people he loves. And ask yourself, how can I help them? How can I show more kindness? How can I pray for them? Basically, just try to do the opposite. I heard a story one time about a man who was visiting his second grade son's class, and they had this big game. You've probably played this with kids before, or maybe when you were a kid, where you got balloons and you tie a string to them and tie them on your ankle, and then you run around and you try to protect your balloon while you stomp on everyone else's. Anybody play that game before? It's an amazing game. It's this dog-eat-dog kind of, survival of the fittest kind of game, right? And the winner's always like the biggest, meanest, worst kid in the room, because they're just like, "Bah!" The bully kid, right? And this is what happens. This guy watches this whole interaction, and this is what happens every time. And now there was a couple kids who decided, we're going to lose, so they committed balloon suicide, and it was cool, right? But by and large, this is kind of how it happens, the survival of the fittest. Then he says, another class circled through this activity, and this is a special needs class. And he said, I just got a sick feeling in my stomach because I knew what was about to happen. And so as he's watching, they tie the balloons to their ankles, and they explain the directions. And most of these special needs kids have Down syndrome. And the teacher says, go. And they understood the breaking of the balloon part, but they didn't grasp the dog-eat-dog part of it. Because as these kids went about, they helped one another pop the balloons. And so the little girl would hold down her balloon so the little boy could step on it. And then she would clap, and then he would hold down his balloon so she could step on it, and it would pop, and they would clap. And at the end of the game, when all the balloons had popped, they all celebrated, and they were so excited. They all had a wonderful time. So here's my question for you. Which is the better way to play the game? Which is the better way to play the game? Which way are you playing the game? How are you keeping score? I think Jesus would say, you keep score by how many people you help along the way. I think what Jesus would say is you keep score by how many people you encourage to shine, how many people you compliment or you recognize. Who could you brag about this week behind their back? Who could you encourage? Who could you let take the credit? This week, just to make sure envy doesn't creep in at work, at school, At the bus stop, when you're dropping off your kids in the fall, when you get out there and you start in the new school year. Pray for your competitor to shine. Pray for them to do well. And a competitor is anybody you compare yourself to, or anybody you compare your kids to. Now, you may not feel like you want to do this. You can't control your feelings. Don't misunderstand me. But the beautiful thing about prayer is you get to control that. And as you pray for other people to be successful, I want you to pray that God would exchange that deadly sin of envy in your life with the fruit of the Spirit, part of the fruit of the Spirit called love. Because that's Jesus' plan. And the thing about Jesus' plan is it's the exact opposite of your instincts. We're going to transition into a time of communion now. And so I want to end my time with you this morning with a word about the cross and about envy. Because really, on a human level, envy is why the cross happened. We're told in the book of Mark that Pilate saw that it was out of envy that the chief priests handed Jesus over to him. It's kind of a Cain and Abel scenario all over again. Jesus had been, he had been followed because of his amazing love for others. He had this charisma, this power, this authority. He could heal people. He was this amazing teacher. And the religious leaders of that day, people like me, they took no joy in that. They felt diminished by him. They felt less than because of him. And they envied him so much that they formed this elaborate plan to kill him. Now, of course, Jesus knew that that was God's plan for him to die. And so he went along with this. And the very plan that was born out of envy to kill him was the very plan that eradicated envy, if you want it. Jesus decided, I will be the object of the worst that envy can do. I will put myself in the place of Abel. I will allow my blood to be spilled on the ground. And my response to that envy that's happening is just going to be love. And I'm going to forgive. Jesus didn't do what everybody else does. He didn't protect himself. He didn't avenge himself. He did the opposite. He did it his whole life. God became a baby, the king in a manger, a savior on a cross. The whole crazy story, the whole message of Jesus is just the opposite of how we would do it. And as followers of Jesus, we pause every week in this kind of symbol of communion to say thank you for the cross, for God's amazing love, for while we were still sinners, greedy, lustful, wrathful, gluttonous, prideful, lazy, envious sinners, Christ died for us. Not just to eradicate the consequences of our behavior, but so that we would follow in his steps. And we would die to our impulses and choose to do things his way. Surrender. Love. It's not easy, but it's what we're called to do. Let's pray together.